Okay. So, can someone start by praying for us?
I will.
Please.
Father, we gather here this morning, Lord, looking forward, Lord, in our lives to, Lord, the way that you are working, the way that you are moving in us. Lord, we want to be more and more aware and grateful, Lord, of each place and season, Lord, that you lead us through, each time and each person, or each thing that you use to teach us, Lord, your living way. And just thank you for this time to meet together and to share in one another's encouragement and trial, Lord, and Lord, each thing that we bring. May we be mindful, Lord, of the way that we engage and always listening for your Spirit, Lord, and its guidance. Thank you for this time. Would you bless each mind, Lord? Help us to be at rest within our hearts and be listening. Amen.
Amen. All right. Corbin, you working on getting one of these yet or no?
I got the other book. It'll be coming tomorrow.
Okay.
Supposedly tomorrow.
Sounds good.
I should have bought one of these as well.
I can send you a link if you need me to. All right. I think we are going to start with 15:9. I want to kind of change the format that we read these together. So like, instead of picking random people, maybe volunteers. I know that only a handful of people will volunteer each time anyways, but there's not really anything wrong with that. So does anyone want to read the first part?
I can.
Okay. And then who would like to read the commentary?
I can do it.
Sounds good. On 15:9.
The master said, "No scholar, official of noble intention, or good person would ever pursue a life at the expense of goodness. And in fact, some may be called upon to give up their lives in order to fulfill goodness."
As Colin Angelo remarks, the point is that the scholar official of noble intention and the good person do not overly cherish their own lives. An alternate version of Confucius' statements is found in Mencius 3b1 and 5b7, which recount a story from the Zool commentary, where a gamekeeper risks death by refusing to answer a ritually improper summons from his lord, and then quote Confucius as remarking, "The scholar official of noble intention never forgets that he may end up in a roadside ditch, and the courageous scholar official never forgets that he may lose his head." The idea is that the true devotee of the Confucian way values it over life itself. This is not to say that such a person is foolhardy or suicidal. Merely that for him, issues of righteousness take precedence over self-preservation, as you even mentioned 6:8:10. Fish is something that I desire. Bear's paw is also something I desire. If it is not possible to obtain both at the same time, I would give up the fish and take the bear's paw. Life is something that I desire. Righteousness is also something that I desire. If it is not possible to obtain both at the same time, I would give up life and take rightness. This is because, although life is something that I desire, There are things that I desire more than life. Therefore, life is not something that I seek to preserve at any cost. Death is something that I hate. And yet, there are things that I hate even more than death. This is why there are troubles that I do not choose to avoid. Dementia's passage is targeted at self-preservativeness school, exemplified by Jan Kuhl, and it is possible that 15.9 has a similar target.
I like that excerpt from Mencius. He's just like such a clear writer. Like he almost seems to take too much time to explain his point, but he does it. He like follows you through his path of thought so concisely.
Reminds me of the analogies your dad will always do.
Like what?
I don't know, he'll just always, he very often will have a story that almost feels like it belabors the point, but it all the time pretty much is a good way into his mind as to how he thinks about such things, and often is honestly quite helpful.
Yeah. You could see this as being a little dark because it's talking about the precedence that rightness and the way has over your own life, especially in the first part of that commentary talking about how the gentleman or the person that wants to follow the way is not unaware of the fact that his body might end up in a ditch or he might lose his head. So again, that's the very dark part of it. It's also kind of more contextually explained by the kind of time they lived in, the gentlemen at this time. So if you're serving in a political position, those are the kind of situations that are a lot more possible for you to end up in than obviously it is for us. None of us being in political positions. But as with every Analect that we read, it's a bit of it's more than a mental exercise, but it is still partly a mental exercise to extend the principle being shared here into our lives, so making it relevant. And that's, hopefully I'm not repeating myself too much when I say this, but that's what I want everyone to be practicing when we read these together, is doing that extension. So it takes a creative work. That's what I was talking about last week with what you guys already do when you write poetry. So that's kind of what we're practicing here.
Well, I kind of see this very easily applicable to something that we believe and try to practice in our own lives, which is giving, kind of like laying down our lives, and not solely in a carnal way, or flesh way. Well, it is a flesh way, but like not being dead. I mean, but laying down our own idea and pursuit of life for something that is greater than ourselves. That's what I thought about when reading it.
There was a word in particular there at the very end that stood out to me. It was actually describing a school at that time. But we've brought up the word as kind of a hidden root to a lot of self-driven behavior. Mm-hmm. Do you guys know what that word is? It was there at the end of the commentary.
Self-perversionist?
Preservation, yeah. Self-preservation. So does that ring a bell for any of you as far as certain discussions that we have had before? Mm-hmm. So share some of your thoughts about that. Because I think that's again, I'd describe it as a root.
I think it connects to that orphan mindset and that there's another word for it, but the survival mindset of it can take place literally when certain needs are not met in the home, but also its roots kind of go deep spiritually, to where it sort of creates a mind that is focused on survival. And because those needs were not met at a time, the mind has not escaped from that place, and so acts as though everything must be done for the sake of survival, which inherently, when it comes to self-preservation as well, as you can tell by the wording, is very self-centered and self-focused.
Mm-hmm. It's very base and animal-like too, in a way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Like it's almost like, I guess I was gonna use, yeah, like an animal. Like there's nothing outside of like your scope of life. Like if it doesn't concern you or affect you, and your well-being, it's something that's not within like your bubble of concern. That's what I kind of thought of self-preservation as.
Yeah, I'm kind of seeing that as this root of self-preservation as being still a part of, or it is a root of that very common view or inclination that pretty much everybody has or experiences or directly and outrightly pursues, of life being a matter of pursuing happiness and pleasing oneself in whatever way they understand that to look like. That actually it still comes from that deep, visceral, fleshly nature of preserving one's own life.
What's always been interesting about that to me is like that's I don't even know if I would call it Western really, but like the idea of like your life being the most important thing ever to you. I mean, some people are like can't even admit that, but some people like straight up admit that that's the most important thing to them, is doing what they want.
Mm-hmm.
But because I wonder, I'm curious, just in history, how long that has been something that's very there. Because I can understand that in the context of people in history who had a lot of privilege. Because I don't know,
That's what I was.
I feel like that's something that's not even there when you have a certain kind of lifestyle.
Mm-hmm. Like, how often do people actually ascend the pyramid of needs?
Yeah.
Or do they like get everything and they're like, I'm good now?
Yeah.
They don't start seeking better things.
Because and I think about like people in like much more ancient times and like kingdoms and communities of people. Like it seemed like there was kind of a mind of togetherness with people.
Mm-hmm.
But then you had people like kings and rulers, evil people, who wanted to only pursue their own lives because they had the power to do so. Like their minds could kind of be there because they were able to see above, because they had some kind of privilege to think beyond a people, and it kind of came to themselves.
It's very interesting, because I like the way that you put that, because you think it would be the reverse.
Right.
I think it would be when you're going out and you're hunting for your food every day, or you're growing your own crop so that you and your community can survive off of that. That is very much, you go into every single day not knowing if your base needs will be provided for. And you'd think that can be very consuming on the brain. But what history, and I would even say what you've kind of accurately denoted, is less of, although it is very related to the West, I would say is more of a modern mind,
Mm-hmm.
where we have so many of our needs met. Not the things we necessarily think we need, but like shelter, food, and relationship are like the three cornerstones, I would say, for human survival. And almost all of us have that met every single day in every single way. And so when those three things are fulfilled, you'd think, oh, okay, well, it's easy for the brain to not be in this survival mindset. But it also almost feels like it's the contrary. It feels like that in the modern society that we live in now, almost like the pyramid of needs is kind of expanded. And to when you have the things you actually do need met, your brain kind of expands what it thinks it does need.
Mm-hmm. You set the bar higher.
Yeah.
You don't go to the next thing, but you're like, now I need this stuff.
Mm-hmm. And I would say even so far as like looking back in time to the people who genuinely did not always have those needs met, who had to kind of live every day trying to meet those needs. I mean, it was very evident that people in that position were still able to live lives for the Lord. And you see that in the Bible, and you even see that, people like farmers being exemplified in some instances in the Confucian way, and how it's that simple way of life that can, I'm not saying it's necessarily necessary, but I would say it's a greater proof that like if people who genuinely don't even know if those needs will be met on a daily basis can still devote their thoughts to something higher than just base needs, then I would say that it is certainly possible for those of us who do have those needs met to be able to kind of, and it's not even necessarily a matter of whether or not those needs are met or not, but it's a matter of what consumes your thoughts day by day. Where does your brain often go? Is it, I need to do this, I need to do that, this needs to happen, right? Because that is a very, in the moment, you don't think much of it. You don't think it's very self-centered because it's just how life is. You're just getting the things that you need. But if you break it down, I think you start to realize how pointlessly consuming it all is, and how it all does kind of loop back on in itself to the self.
Makes me even think about like God not his original purpose for man or his people, like back with the Israelites when they came out of the wilderness, is like his point for them not to have a king, and that makes sense because God as their king, who is incorruptible, would be that source for them. And we can see when Saul became king, he gave into the power so instant, like just like that. Even with David and even with Saul, they all gave into that in a way. I mean, obviously there were also David and the other kings, that some of them, they were very righteous, but in a way they all gave into that kind of self-preservationist way.
First thing I would clarify about self-preservation is that it is not the same thing as a survival mindset. That's self-preservation in a more desperate, concentrated sense. But self-preservation is actually a very subtle and quiet but ever-present root of behind behavior. That's what we're trying to explore here a little bit. Further, I would say this distinction, this historical distinction we're making between the wealthy and the poor, it's actually a very common narrative in trying to interpret history. But just to simplify it a little bit, I can definitely say that there is not a preference given to one or the other as far as how one expresses or goes through this route of self-preservation, because it is pervasive. It is within both sides, and it looks a little different. So, oversimplifying it somewhat, with the poorer groups of people all throughout history, it is still very much something that drives the behavior of such people, despite their simple lives. I mean, you guys just mentioned Israel. It's a really kind of a sad example of, because they express that self-preservation all throughout their time in the desert, and they were a simple, poor, and lowly people. But that root still showed itself quite often in the way they responded to the provision that God was showing them. And then with more wealthy groups, and this was an interesting point y'all made about the presence of self, and the word I'll add to that is the ego, the way that the ego manifests itself differently in these groups. It is definitely more diluted in a way with the poorer people. There's not as much of like a sense of self. There's definitely more a like unity or community way of thinking. And that is actually the way we can learn from that is as relatively wealthy, well-to-do people, all things considered, not even just in this age, but in all of history as a backdrop. That's definitely something we can learn from what has been the state of mind of lower classes of people, is the way they think as a community. But with wealthier people, all throughout history, there's been a much more concentrated sense of ego. So again, going back to that period with Israel, you had people like the Pharaoh who, and this is a very unique part of ancient Egyptian history, but this idea of kingship and being considered as God on earth in human form. One of the first expressions of that idea of being a human expression of a heavenly and divine power came from ancient Egypt. It's a really, really old idea. Of course, it's been in God's mind and heart in the correct and actual way ever since the beginning. So Egyptians didn't make that up, even though that's what historians believe. All to say, the root of self-preservation expresses itself throughout all mankind, throughout all of history. That's how deep and long-running a feature of man's makeup it is. I wanted to add a little bit of background to what we just read here with the school mentioned at the end, the self-preservationists, because this will kind of round out our idea of how it's being presented here a little bit. Following around the time of Confucius, but especially following Confucius' time, you guys have probably heard me mention that it was called the school, or it was called the time of the 100 schools of philosophy, because there were just so many different schools and followings that popped up. But the three major ones, there were probably at least 5 major ones, but the 3 that I'll mention is there were the Confucianists, so people that adhered to the teachings of Confucius in what they thought was the most accurate way. And then there were 2 schools that actually rose up against Confucius, but they came from completely opposite directions. The first that we see here is the self-preservationists, as inspired by that teacher Yang Zhu. He never wrote any of his own things, but he was the guy that basically said the purpose of life and the right thing to do is to do whatever makes you happy. So whatever benefits you as an individual. That is not just a nice thing to do, that is actually your moral obligation. That was basically the way that was presented. It is right and moral and good, even in the sense that Confucius uses those words, to do what is right for you. So it was a very interesting view that brought about a pretty significant following. And the other side were the Moists. So Mozo was the teacher of this school. And they had the complete opposite idea. They basically taught, do whatever is right and good is whatever you do for everyone's happiness. So you don't just consider self, you consider the happiness of the community, of the whole group. So that was basically what guided every decision, even every relationship you had. And that was the really controversial thing for followers of Confucius, was the Moa said, you need to love your own father sorry, you need to learn to love another person's father just as much and with just as much affection as you love your own father. So love should not be something that is shown in degrees, like I love this person more than the other because they're closer to me. But love should be equally applied to everyone you know. There shouldn't be any kind of disparity there. And you can see how that fits into the purpose of, one's life and philosophy to be the happiness of the whole. So both of these schools that I'd mentioned were attacking Confucius because Confucius's mode of thought was in opposition in one way or another to these two different schools. Because in Confucian philosophy there was a degree of, in response to the first school, a self-sacrifice. As we just read there, the gentleman is aware of the fact that for the cause of rightness and the way, he might end up dead. He doesn't consider his life better or more worthy than it. And then in disagreement with the Moa school, there is that idea of the all-embracing love is a little bit misinformed, and that there are degrees of respect that differ depending on how a person relates to you. And that's actually a very healthy thing. And it's what keeps relationships and communities and even societies structured well and keeps them together. It's not what causes separation and disagreement. So, what I was hoping to get out of some more of you that haven't shared yet is more of your take on this idea of self-preservation and how you see that working out with a few other ideas that have been mentioned, like death to self, but also what tends to work against a more selfless mindset, and how you can identify self-preservation working in the more self-centered ways of going about things, not just in your current set of desires, but also the way that you project those onto your future, so, and your identity too. So self-perception is something we talked about a little bit last week, but you can also consider this in light of what you think is ahead for you, just all sorts of different ways that you can take it. But I want to hear more from you guys.
Yeah, connecting the self-perception with the self-preservation, I feel like self-preservation is kind of a prioritization of the pride of life.
Mm-hmm.
And because like being what's the word I'm looking for? Perceiving goodness as more important as your own life is like a more true picture of humility, as what people often talk about. Like humility is just like not saying that you're not thinking of yourself. Well, it's a more true way to describe you not thinking of yourself higher than you should.
Interesting, yeah.
But I was just thinking about that as you mentioned self-perception, because in that way they do kind of connect to each other.
So humility is less of a way in which you posture yourself to others, which it is partly, but seeing it as more of a reprioritizing of what your life is for, or how your life measures against things that actually are more valuable than it. It's an interesting way to look at it.
Me and my mom were having a conversation last night, actually, that has a lot to do with this Analect and humility. I probably won't be able to like explain what we talked about as much. It's just
That's all right.
encouraging to see this after having that conversation, because it really encouraged me. But she was sharing from a book she was reading, and I can't remember what book it was, but it was like about somebody who went into like the heavenly realm. I don't remember the book, I wish I did, but it was talking about always being humble before the Lord. And man, I really wish I could figure out how to say this. I don't know, it just reminded me a lot of what you kind of just said about humility, and I really appreciate it, because it is a conversation that I recently had, and I know it's sounding like I'm just babbling on, but I'm very touched by this topic at the moment, because it's something the Lord is teaching me as I want to be somebody who gives my life and wants what He wants, and I'm sure as we all do, but he's teaching me how to be humble before Him, and I don't know.
Yeah, the commentary mentioned something about this kind of revaluing of one's own life against goodness and the way, as not being a kind of reckless abandon of one's life. But in another sense, especially since we are looking at it not just from Confucius' point of view, but from the point of view of a son, it is a reckless abandon to the Father. And that's the way I only feel confident of saying that because those very words, or something very close to it, were used in Oswald Chambers' description of how we consider our lives as unto the Lord. So in one sense, it is absolutely not a reckless abandon to life circumstance. So we're not looking for an opportunity to completely destroy ourselves by giving up our life in some sacrificial or suicidal or martyr-like fashion. But we can be almost foolishly reckless in our abandon of life to God's purpose. But obviously we'd have to understand exactly what that is. So it can't necessarily be our own idea. And that's where things can get a little confusing and potentially misleading, is if God's purpose is actually this story that we've made up, this imagination that is not at all given to us by the Spirit. Because then it does eventually maybe just turn out to be this very overly self-sacrificial facade that we're putting on. And that's not actually healthy for oneself or for anyone else. So the way humility works into this is a very interesting and important question, as you're realizing, because we're not looking at a humility as a, how did Derek Prince always put it? Humility isn't you would say humility is not like a personality. It's not
a disposition.
A disposition. There was a really simple word he had used. It's not like an attitude.
A trait.
Or a trait. Yeah, maybe it's something closer to that. Because that's the way we want to understand humility, is it looks like something in a person. Like, oh, he's so meek and humble and lowly. Those are just manifestations of what true humility is. That itself isn't humility. He would always say humility is a choice or something like that. I really wish I could remember. it's a pattern of decision making.
I feel like it's kind of like when you're pursuing, I think of like our relationship with the Lord as like pursuing the greater things, I guess. Oh man, I'm sorry. I'm kind of all over the place. But when you are pursuing that relationship with Him and that connection, I feel like the things that we tend to worry about, and at least for me, I tend to worry about relationships within my family and inner circle, outer circle, and something He's been teaching me, that when my eyes and weight is just set to what He is teaching me, those things He kind of aligns all of those things.
Mm-hmm.
I was struggling recently just with a certain relationship, and I remember after like taking that to Him and not necessarily focusing all my attention to it, that is when it kind of came into the way it was, I guess, maybe not meant to be, but the way He was intending for it in that time. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that goes with what we're saying, but that's just what I was
I think it does, yeah.
thinking about. That's funny. I was kind of telling Isabel about that last night. Mm-hmm. The idea that kind of, if I'm understanding what you're saying, kind of like when we are orienting our hearts and minds to the Lord and His purpose, the way that our life unravels is the way that He wants it to be for us. Mm-hmm. And I mean, it is that way whether or not we are focusing on His purpose, but we are more likely to, like, it's kind of what Jesus said, your will be done, not mine. That heart posture makes it so He can yield good fruit in your life, mm-hmm. even if that comes in the form of suffering. Mm-hmm. But I'd like to see how that connects to humility, and I guess connecting to the Lord does take humility, but I'd like to see how that connects to like letting go of self-preservation, because I've always thought it was interesting how Jesus would be like, if you do this, then this, because that whole mindset of like doing it to get something is kind of defeats the whole purpose. But that's not me arguing with what Jesus said. It's just me thinking about how I wonder how many people go into Christianity for their own benefit. And I think that this Confucian way is talking about how, and we've talked about this before when we were going through it as kind of an introduction, about how it's not like you're not doing it for your own benefit so that something good happens to you. And that doesn't disagree with the way that Jesus walked. I just had thought it was interesting the way He would phrase it when He was talking to people. Which I guess I just have to learn to understand why He says that, because He will talk to people about you have to give up everything to follow me. I might just need to put it into context more.
It's a bit of an overused analogy, but maybe it's good to remind us of it. But being, considering this as kind of like being in a river, and our opposition to where, because we are put in the river of God's way, so to speak, when we commit our lives to it. So what happens from there is kind of up to, or the way that we experience being in the river is then kind of dependent on us in some senses, because we can oppose the flow of it, so start to resist it physically and move. Like this is a really silly picture, but if we've ever been in a fast flowing river, we've probably experienced it. But if your head moves perpendicular to the flow of the river, then your ears will like fill up with water and it's very uncomfortable. But if you're like directly facing the flow that the river is going, then you won't have that problem. Or when you start to try to swim against it or put your arms out, then it's always kind of a struggle. So the scariest thing about being in the river, obviously, is that you're being carried wherever it's taking you.
There's a lack of control
Yeah,
on your part.
but that's actually up to you to give up that control. And I think that's part of what, it's part of how we can understand humility to work, is it's actually a release of doing and needing to have a handle on a situation. I can just imagine being able to see at least some distance down. Maybe sometimes you can't really see at all, but in some points in life you can see the nearing of some kind of catastrophe. So maybe it's like a waterfall is ahead of you, and the question of what will happen to you following that event, like whether or not you'll even survive it, is completely unknown to you. And those are the points that we begin to like resist. Like, okay, I have to get out of here, or I have to grab onto something, at least grab onto something for a time so I can think about what to do next. But even the act of wanting to take a pause and think about it before you even get into it is itself an act of resisting the flow of that river. So there's not really anything you can do. You just have to kind of see what happens. That's very adventurous. It also seems very foolish too. But that's in many ways how it looks to be in God's way.
That reminds me of the aspect of courage that we went over, about how like it has to be applied with the other virtues or else it's unbalanced. But I feel like this could be a very good application of courage when you're in the river. Is like it could take courage to let go of your control and let the river take you.
Yeah. The two other that we had mentioned specifically, I think, were love and wisdom, right? Because I don't think you have to be that courageous if you're utterly ignorant of everything that's going on around you. But we don't want to remain in ignorance. So the more, say, enlightened we are, or informed in some ways that we are about something, the wiser we become in it. But the wiser that we become in something, I think the more prone we are to grief and fear. Because the more you know about something, the more you're aware of things that can hinder or obstruct or even damage you. Like I'm speaking in really broad sense right now. It's just having to do with the entirety of one's life, like where it's going and trending. So it is necessary to have to also be courageous in light of those things. So that's kind of plays into how you see the waterfall ahead of you, in a way. And those are always things that you will encounter in life.
Wasn't it talking about how if courage is not balanced with the other virtues, then it's like stubborn or something? I feel like the wrong...
Oh, you're even referencing the Analects itself, yeah.
I feel like the wrong kind of courage could even be like that, trying to resist the flow.
Yep.
Because
which one
you
was
don't
that?
understand.
This actually I think I have it bookmarked because I like this one. Yep. Loving courage without balancing it with a love for learning will result in the vice of unruliness. So that's another term that could play very well into this conversation, is the one that we've talked about many times before, being the love of learning, which you guys all wrote. Didn't you all write a essay or something on that? Can't remember. Or a poem, maybe.
Yeah, I was thinking about that a little bit when I was talking about humility and being the letting go of self-preservation, because like it's gonna be hard for me to explain this. Like the love of learning is also a similar letting go and letting the river take you, I guess, is a better analogy, because I just felt like it had fit with the letting go of self-preservation, but I couldn't fully explain it in my mind. So the river analogy kind of helps to connect that. But that probably doesn't make sense. It makes sense in my mind, but I have to figure out how to explain it more.
No, it makes sense. You're just connecting what we were talking about. We have really used that analogy a lot, but I appreciate it because, I mean, I haven't anytime recently. Maybe I should join Maximus one of these days. But being in a river and feeling that it's a very unique feeling, and being able to once again extend, almost in a poetic sense, that very physical and fearful feeling of being swept by a river and attaching that to the attitude that we carry towards life itself is just can be very enlightening. What about the rest of you? I haven't heard from some of you. Doesn't have to be immediately connected to anything we were just talking about.
Yeah, I was kind of thinking a little bit about something that Haley said with, I guess, having that mind of self-preservation and kind of like how we come out of it. I think it's interesting to me to notice that in my life, the Lord has kind of let me go through that mindset a lot. Like, it feels like that I've gone through a lot of situations with that mind. And more than anything, it's been obviously a choice as well to come out of it, but also kind of just something that He uses to really contrast His way. Like, it's part of the process to have that mindset. It's a natural way of life that we all are born into. So it's like, He works with it, I think, a lot of the time. Like, He allows us to stumble in it and to realize, I guess, the need, or even what it means to come out of it, which is, I think, one of the biggest mindset shifts that we face maybe for following Him, is realizing that it isn't for us ultimately, you know. But if even thinking back on the change, and I still struggle with that and want to make that change every day. But the way that it has come about has been just a very unthought of thing, I guess. I didn't really need to think about it much. It's more of just something that I started to see value in, after time of getting to know, the Lord more. But I definitely came even into this community thinking that for myself, of this is going to be a good thing for me, and I even felt like that was my mindset for a year or more after, where I felt like He was even encouraging me in that, and telling me that it would, because it would. That is the truth. But the way that you see that self-preservation changes to almost something that is for a greater purpose. So it almost it doesn't leave, but it's just it shifts to a different purpose of why you learn to preserve your life, you know, and it comes from a different source, which is not yourself anymore. But you realize that your life actually does need to be preserved by something. But obviously, if it comes from something else, it can't remain in you. So it's interesting to think about.
Well, that kind of brings up the question of what does it mean to preserve your life? Like, what is actually being preserved? Is it the fact that you are still a living, breathing being, as opposed to not living and breathing anymore? Or is it trying to maintain the kind of circumstances in life that you are in presently, or certain aspects of them, as opposed to experiencing some major change in those circumstances? Like, so I would be curious to hear from you. What is it in life that changed that the Lord allowed to change in your perspective towards what is actually worthy of preservation in life?
Well, I feel like it always begins with, like, obviously the self-preservation that we start with is for, you know, our betterment and our settlement of, like, our mind and our soul, like a place that we can feel comfortable and not have to worry about life too much. But I think the change is like seeing that the preservation is supposed to be in our identity in Him. Like the way that we prioritize our identity and the way that He sees us and views us, the way that we like live that way is a kind of preservation of what He values.
So now it's a completely different kind of life. One that maybe wasn't even present in us before we were born into it. Definitely an interesting thought.
I also feel like that kind of preservation that you're describing, once it's changed, is like that's something that you are cultivating in yourself, and it doesn't really have to have any much to do with like the it's not like trying to manipulate or control the circumstances. That kind of preservation of identity, it's almost as if preservation isn't. It's just a different kind of preservation. So I almost want to use a different word for it because it's something that flows along with the river. It's not like it's like you're resisting the ways that you're it's almost as if you're preserving the letting go. So you're preserving the not self-preservation. It's like opposite almost.
It is a little difficult to not see it as like almost a kind of transactional thing, because what was previously being preserved, this all depends on how you look at it, but what was being preserved before, you actually now work to see crucified and put to death. So the very thing that you were guarding the most is the thing that ends up being killed.
And that's part of the process of that new preservation.
Yeah, and that has to take place before the seed of the new life, which is planted in you and then begins to grow in you, is what you nurture and preserve. This is the difference between the life of the flesh versus the life of the spirit. And it is, I think, even in the scriptures described as a thing that you do actually and carefully preserve and protect in you, because it is not invincible from that point, but it's still something that is under your care.
And I think what really brings about like the death of that old perspective is really learning to understand why you preserve your identity in Christ, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because like if you start to understand why you preserve that identity within yourself and you apply it, you realize obviously that it isn't for you. You're not preserving it. But like I even feel like a lot of the times I'm trying to see my preserving of that identity for you guys, like, to be like simple about it, but for the Lord to be able to have a way to work and to connect me and relate me to you guys. That's kind of weird to explain, but
I think we're still understanding better what that identity actually looks like, because it's not simply a matter of me like really feeling it and saying I am a son, because it's not limited to that experience of proclaiming that over yourself. It is something that you like are seeing in a greater and fuller but not yet complete picture every day, and in more than just your own life, but in the body that you're a part of. In fact, Paul himself talks about not being able to see that completely, even in himself and in the peoples around him. You don't see that identity fully yet. And he speaks of that being a process of groaning and awaiting that all of creation is doing, to see that manifestation that has not fully taken place yet. So we can't even say we fully know the experience of one's identity as a son yet. The verse I have in mind in particular is when he says, we see as if in a looking glass. I just ought to find it instead of trying to quote it. And we'll end with this, unless anyone else has anything. Yeah, here we go. And this was actually right after he was talking about love, which is interesting. So starting in verse 8 of 1 Corinthians 13, he says, "Love never fails, but where there are prophecies, they will cease. Where there are tongues, they will be stilled. Where there is knowledge, it will pass away. For we know in part, and we prophesy in part. But when completeness comes, what is in part disappears." And I think this next part kind of describes where we are. When I was a child, I talked like a child, I thought like a child, I reasoned like a child. So much of this shift from what was an okay and understandable way of thinking for the stage of life we were in, to one where we actually begin to think as sons, or what we're coming to understand that to mean. When I became a man, I put the ways of childhood behind me. This is the verse I was thinking of. For now we see only a reflection as in a mirror. And that's the object of our hope and our encouragement, is that reflection that we can see and do know. Then we shall see face to face. Now I know in part. Then I shall know fully, even as I am fully known. Okay. Anyone else? Excited to start that book next week. That'll be fun. Who hasn't read the book before? I'm curious. Way of Peace.
Who hasn't read?
Has not. Oh, it's like more than half of us. Wow. Wait, Isaac has? Oh.
Just didn't raise his hand.
He was raising his elbows.
I read some.
You didn't finish it?